Hello, everyone. We are biochemistry students presenting what we have learned about the science of coronavirus and are by no means experts. This is not medical advice. We're sharing what we know as of now, and as we learn more, this information will likely change.
The coronavirus outbreak was declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization in March of 2020. Since then, there have been more than 29 million cases and more than 500,000 deaths in the United States alone, according to the CDC. The graph shows the daily trends of COVID-19 cases since January 22nd of 2020 in the United States. The widespread effect caused by the virus has changed the way we live our lives. From wearing masks to social distancing to virtual events, we have had to adapt every aspect of our everyday lives. Many factors have enabled this specific coronavirus to cause such a widespread effect, and in this video, we're going to explore why. We will talk about what the virus looks like and how it infects. Then we will explain ways of mitigating the spread and the importance of getting vaccinated. At the end of the video, we will also provide some links that may be useful. COVID-19 is not the first coronavirus pandemic. The first coronavirus was identified in 1920 in chickens. Coronavirus would not be found in humans for another 40 years. More recently, there was a major outbreak of SARS in 2003 in China. SARS stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, and the disease is also caused by a species of coronavirus. In 2012, another coronavirus-related respiratory illness was identified in Saudi Arabia called MERS. The coronavirus vaccine was developed quickly because scientists learned a lot from researching both MERS and SARS. We will start by talking about the structure of the virus. You've probably seen a picture or two of the coronavirus floating around on the news or in the internet. Some may see this blob with red spikes and may wonder, how can this virus that's smaller than a speck of dust cause this much damage? The coronavirus can be described as a shell that contains spikes on the outside that make it look like a crown. And corona means crown. The red spikes that you see in the images are referred to as spike proteins. The spike proteins are the key to one of the locks on some of our cells that are found in our nose, lungs, and other places. The lock is called the ACE2 and is another protein made by our cells. The outer shell of the virus also has other proteins called the membrane protein and the envelope protein. All these are important to make the virus particles and protect it. There is also another protein called the nucleocapsid that sits on the inside of the protective membrane of the virus. The nucleocapsid holds the genetic material of the virus, which is made up of RNA. The RNA contains all the information that the virus needs to make copies of itself using the materials inside of our cells. Think of this as the blueprint for that virus to make even more viruses once it's entered our cells. So this genetic information comes along in every virus and is called its genome. The genome of the coronavirus is relatively long compared to other types of viruses. It has all the information the virus needs to be able to make more of itself. It has the instructions to make more of its protective outer shell, the proteins on the inside, and many other proteins that help the virus make more of itself and to fool the security system inside our cells that recognize foreign intruders. So overall, the virus is made up of its genome and all its genetic information, and proteins that protect the genome, as well as its outside spikes with the spike protein. The spike proteins act as a key and bind to the lock on our cells. The lock on our own cells are other proteins called ACE2 receptors. When these two proteins fit together, the virus will be pulled into the cell. When the virus enters the cell, it leaves its shell on our cell. It's like taking its coat off and putting its genome inside our cell. The virus has instructions to make a copy of itself. To make these copies, the virus hijacks the machinery in our cells. In our cells, our DNA makes copies of portions of itself that we call genes. This copy of DNA is called messenger RNA or mRNA and is used to make proteins. Coronavirus brings RNA that is both its genome and mRNA, so it's ready to make proteins from it. Our cells can recognize the coronavirus RNA as a messenger RNA and can make its proteins. Once some of the early proteins get made, they help the virus make a copy of its RNA using our cells, which is important so the virus can spread. Once our cells help to make these proteins, the virus uses them to make new copies of its own genome. These proteins also help to make smaller, special cut versions of the virus genome. They're called nested RNA. These new smaller pieces of RNA have instructions for making all other components of the virus, like the envelopes and spike proteins and everything else. Normally, our messenger RNA makes one protein. Viruses, on the other hand, make mRNA that can make many proteins. This means that many proteins get made but come out linked to each other, like beads on a necklace. We call this polyproteins. It makes it easy to assemble the virus in our cell. The viruses also make proteins that can act as scissors and cut up the many linked up proteins into individual proteins, which then get busy doing their work. Like the nucleocapsid protein binds to the virus RNA to pack in the virus. Once all the components, which are RNA, all the structural proteins, and envelope are made, it is packaged and leaves the cell to infect other cells. It steals its cover from our cells, and hence it's more difficult for our immune system to recognize the viruses. It is like they're wearing our coats. Our bodies have ways to stop the virus from infecting other cells, and that's by the immune system. The immune system is what defends our bodies against things that cause disease. We sometimes use words like pathogens to describe them, which just means viruses and bacteria that cause disease. Our immune system creates a special proteins called antibodies, which attach to viruses and bacteria and marks them for destruction. When these viruses and bacteria causing the disease are destroyed, the disease ends. Some cells that make antibodies that bind bacteria and viruses are saved as memory cells and have memories, so the next time the body encounters the same virus or bacteria, it is ready and we don't get sick from the disease. The problem is that when our immune system sees a new virus or bacteria, it has to make a lot of different antibodies until it gets the right one. We get sick because our immune systems have to work very hard to find the right antibodies to learn how to recognize and eliminate the virus and bacteria which hurt us. A vaccine is something that we create to train the immune system against against viruses and bacteria that can cause diseases before they encounter the real thing. So a vaccine can be a part of a virus or a bacteria or a dead piece of it that is on the outside, or proteins that viruses use as keys to get into our cells. Our body's immune system can be trained to destroy the new bacteria and viruses that it hasn't yet seen so we don't get sick. Our immune systems are smart. Once they destroy a pathogen, they remember that pathogen, sometimes forever, although sometimes it's also for a shorter period of time. There are currently 3 vaccines approved in the United States for the coronavirus. There is the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Pfizer and Moderna are very similar, and both use a newer vaccine method which uses a small portion of the RNA of the virus to make a short portion of a protein of the virus. This new approach is called an mRNA vaccine. The mRNA vaccine against coronavirus injects a blueprint, which is the mRNA, to make the spike protein, which acts as a key to use the ACE2 receptor and unlock a way to get the virus into our cells. This blueprint then makes the spike protein so our immune system can see it and recognize it. Then, our immune system can recognize the spike protein when it encounters coronavirus and quickly destroys it so we don't get sick with COVID-19. The vaccine produced by Johnson & Johnson is called an adenovirus vaccine. An adenovirus vaccine is a virus. An adenovirus is a virus that we deal with routinely, like the common cold. The vaccine uses this virus to make a little bit of a spike protein, which trains our immune system for coronavirus. We have done this to make vaccines many times before. As you see, vaccines prepare our bodies to deal with bacteria and viruses that are harmful. It is important to get vaccinated because it prevents serious infection and decreases the severity of disease. It allows us to live with the viruses. Even when we get infected, because of vaccines, we often get mild diseases and don't make so many new viruses. This keeps other people around us safe when we come in contact with them. This is the only way we will be able to get back to a more normal everyday life. So getting vaccinated as soon as you're eligible is important. When enough of us are vaccinated, then the virus cannot find a new home to make copies of itself. Then the community is safer. This is called herd immunity. When viruses multiply, they make mistakes, and some of these mistakes are good for the viruses. Viruses collect useful mistakes and become good at escaping our immune system. Sometimes the mistakes are such that antibodies made by our body in preparation for the virus recognize the virus only weakly and sometimes not at all. One of the current issues with the vaccine is that in some places of the world, including the US, the coronaviruses are changing. We call these new variations of the virus variants. These variants are becoming good at getting inside the cell. This means that the virus is more likely to infect people. These variants are also not how we trained our immune system, and if they change enough, then we have to change our vaccines. This could then cause another wave of infection. This means that even after people are vaccinated, there is no guarantee that we can stop the virus unless we get enough of us vaccinated faster than the variants are reaching us. Until then, we still need to be careful. So in the next section, we will talk a little bit about life after the pandemic and things we can do to keep everyone safe. So what does life look like at the end of the pandemic? Odds are that it won't be normal like we once knew it, and it will take longer to get back to that. Though mandatory mask wearing may come to an end sooner rather than later, people will still have to be cautious. That said, there is cause for hope too. With millions of people being vaccinated every day, we can get ahead of the virus and return to a way of life like before the virus. New vaccines are already being developed to catch the variants too. The virus will never fully go away, but with time and research, we will develop medicine to treat the disease and make new vaccines, and it will become as easy to treat as the flu. All we can hope for is that the normal we return to doesn't disregard the mistakes that has made this pandemic as bad as it is. The world after coronavirus may be more cautious about traveling and sanitation, and hopefully those in charge will be spending their time and effort preparing so we can prevent a situation like this from happening ever again. This past year has left millions of people with scarred lungs, breathing problems, and millions of people dead, not to mention the millions more with some sort of trauma due to losing a loved one to the virus. We hope that one pandemic like this is enough of a wake-up call for the public and governing bodies to take the threat of new and dangerous viruses more seriously. But what should you do to stay safe from COVID-19? A good first step is to wear a mask. Coronaviruses are small enough that millions of viruses can survive inside a teeny tiny speck of water in the air. Like when we breathe out, if we breathe these viruses containing specks of into the air, the viruses can then get inside us. The fibers of the mask catch our breath and the water in it, and so they can prevent the viruses from going into the air. We should also try to stay at least 6 feet apart from anyone outside our home until we have a better handle on infection. Physical distancing or social distancing helps to prevent the spread of coronavirus by limiting our exposure to potentially infected people and their breath. It is important to remember that not everyone shows symptoms of being infected with COVID, and some never do. So it's better to stay safe and stay at a distance as much as one can. The little water droplets that can contain coronavirus particles can stay in the air for a long time, especially indoors. It is safer to spend time outside where air circulates and the droplets are dispersed more quickly. Hand washing allows us to use normal soap to wash off the virus from our hands, so it helps prevent the spread of many illnesses like the flu. And it's the same for coronavirus. Washing our hands regularly with soap and water is the best way to keep bacteria and viruses away from us. Finally, it is important to pay attention to our own health. If we notice a fever or have persistent body aches, that might be a symptom of COVID-19. It is also important to remember that one doesn't always show symptoms to be infected with COVID-19, so it's better to be safe and take precautions. If we have a choice of taking sick days when we are sick, then we should, so that we do not become super spreaders of the disease and it keeps our communities safe. A full list of symptoms as well as an expanded list of safety precautions for COVID-19 can be found at this website. Here's more information on COVID-19. Thank you.